my advice would be first kind of take a step back to reflect and create awareness of what's been going on. So have a look at your calendar and see how much time you actually spend in meetings and how much you could potentially free up. So if you see that visually, I mean, if you look at the calendar, if from someone like being stuck in the old way, it's terrifying. Like I kind of, my heart starts racing just looking at a calendar like that. So if you create first that awareness, then you say, okay, how can we solve that? And then start small, start getting small wins. So take one meeting series, look at it and see, do you actually need to still have that meeting, or can that be asynchronous? If that needs to be a meeting, then start implementing those meeting best practices by setting a goal, setting an agenda, trying to shorten the time, getting away from the standard times. And roll with it. See how that feels if you get into the rhythm. And I can assure that person that once you try it out, you feel, okay, that's actually a much better meeting.
Hey everyone, welcome to Leading from Afar, a show by remote leaders for remote leaders, where we dive into the most important topics facing leaders in the future of work. I'm your host, Scott Markovitz. I was the first hire at Envision, one of the first all-remote companies back in 2012. I've since helped build and scale multiple remote teams as an early employee or consultant. In each episode, we geek out doing deep dives on specific topics like within async, hiring the best talent anywhere, how to create a fun and engaging environment remotely, and so much more. This show was created to help managers leading remotely upskill themselves to help them build world-class remote cultures. If you enjoyed this content, please feel free to support me by subscribing in your favorite podcasting app, share it with friends and colleagues, and feel free to buy me a coffee via the show's website. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Leading from Afar. I'm your host, Scott Markovitz. Last week's episode was the first time that I did a show face-to-face in real life, meeting up with a remote friend that I've known for over a year, actually in person, while I was in Berlin on a recent trip. So today is going to actually be the other way around. While in Berlin, I met Robert Schütze, the CEO of Verbally, and today is actually the first time that we're chatting virtually. Robert is building a plugin for Google Meet and Zoom that will kill off all the crappy parts about synchronous meetings. And we all know how desperately we actually need that. We did a deep dive into what a proper synchronous meeting looks like, when to have one, why to have one, and the tools you can use to ensure that they're actually useful and impactful. If you're a leader still running synchronous meetings, you need to listen to this episode. Hey, Robert, thank you for joining today. How's everything going in Berlin?
Hey, Scott. Yeah, thank you. Everything good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. This is a strange feeling for me. I think probably after this episode, I'm releasing an episode that was my first actual recording in real life that I did in Berlin. So I built a relationship with this person virtually for a year plus, and then met in real life while I was in Berlin a few weeks ago. So this is kind of like the opposite. We met in person while in Berlin for the first time, again in real life, and now we're doing it on this side. So it's very strange to have the in-person relationship first, and then kind of the virtual one come afterwards. So coming 2 weeks in a row, having some kind of unique aspect to the episode.
Yeah, but that has been like that in the last years, right? Where most connections were done just virtually. And remember the first real meeting I had again, kind of a get together. It felt so strange at first, kind of meeting lots of new faces again, and some of them then I realized I talked to before through the camera, and then seeing them in person, it was just a weird feeling at first.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting to get back in touch with people, and I think certainly for my Berlin trip of some people that I've been speaking with, some I've been mentoring, and friends of whatever capacity, some for up to like 2 years, and been Zooming back and forth for however long, and then to actually sit there at a table for a coffee or a lunch or what have you, and like, wow, like you're really there. You get like reach out and touch the person. Don't do that, but. So usually the way that we start each one of these episodes is introduce yourself, tell us a little bit more about yourself, and tell us a little bit more about the origin story of Verbally.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, my background, basically I studied back in the days business and international management. After that, I tried out the typical things that they tell you in business school. So tried out corporate setup in FMCG, banking, strategic consulting, basically, yeah, all the things they tell you at business school, what you should do after that. But then, yeah, luckily, that's now around even over 10 years ago, I ended up in the startup world, joining back in the days Zalando, which is an e-commerce fashion player, but now the biggest one in Europe. And I joined them back in the days to build up the Polish market from scratch. And as I'm myself half Polish, that fitted very nicely together to basically bring those two worlds together and build that up for them. Took over the UK market there later as well, but that basically was my starting point into the startup world. And very luckily, as mentioned, because after being able to compare what corporate life or consulting life, banking life is, and just much prefer kind of this very dynamic entrepreneurial approach to the startup world. I've been doing that for a couple of years. Was like in a super high growth phase of Zalando back in the day. So it was very exciting. Like every week there were like hundreds of new colleagues starting, and was part of the time of the IPO of the company. So it was a great experience. But basically after a couple of years, the company got so big that it became from a startup, a scale up, it became more and more of a corporate setup. And one big downside of that was spending way too much time in meetings, and many of that felt very unproductive. And it became really frustrating to be drawn away from the entrepreneurial part, to be actually hands-on to build something, which was what got me so excited in the first place. And that was then a trigger that, okay, that's time for me. Company's at the stage where it just doesn't fit together anymore. So I left, then joined a mobility startup called Happy Car. Joined them as a CEO, was running that for a couple of years. So I was a smaller setup again, and basically scaling the company then from a smaller setup to for a couple of years. So that was a good time, but also there I realized again, kind of meeting is kind of such an integral part of our work life, and that even in a smaller setup, it can be an issue, and very often is an issue that if they're not properly set up, that people are annoyed by being stuck in meetings, and you waste time being stuck in meetings. And basically after that experience, I met my co-founder Adam, and funnily enough, he also worked at Zalando before during the time I was there, but basically my first manager at Zalando was his manager the last 2 years that he was there, and he connected us. And Adam was already working on the idea of Verbally, and basically he was thinking during a sabbatical that what would be the biggest productivity lever at Zalando. And he very quickly ended up at the point that it's meetings. Like, we spent so much time in that company in meetings that if you nail that to solve that problem, it's actually a huge productivity uplift for a company. But not just that, but those bad meetings are super frustrating for employees. So it impacts basically employee satisfaction, motivation. In the end, as for me, it was one of the reasons why I left Zalando. So if you can actually solve that problem, it's not just kind of the pure financial business side from a company perspective, but you can actually impact globally the lives of so many knowledge workers by freeing up their time and kind of getting rid of those unproductive meetings. So in the end, the solution we came up with, Adam came up with, that we've been working on, is that we want to solve those unproductive meetings with a virtual meeting assistant that basically works on top of your video conferencing solution as Google Meet or Zoom currently, in the future as well, Microsoft Teams. And it helps you to structure your meeting, implement meeting best practices. So to show an agenda, to show the goal of the meeting, to keep keep track of the time of the meeting, avoid long monologues with a speaker timer that shows up if someone's been speaking for an extended period of time. So basically anything a moderator would do, but software driven. And through this repetitive approach, it helps you to implement meeting best practices. And the exciting thing about that is that if you talk about that problem, anyone I talk to, everyone has had that experience of bad meetings. So that just keeps us driven every day. It's like, okay, we're really working on something that has an impact on so many meetings, on so many people. So that's what we're working on. And in the next step is basically that we will use meeting analytics to create transparency around the whole topic there. So who spoke how much in the meeting? When did you actually start and end? So helping you, suggesting you then in the future how you can improve on that. So but we can talk about a bit more in detail after that. But that's how we came up with Verbally. That was during the COVID time. So we started February last year with our team. We're based here in Berlin, but working fully remote. We don't have an office. We try to meet up once per week in person. Mostly for culture building and kind of the social interaction. Have been running on that over the last almost 2 years now.
That's awesome. We definitely need, really, I think the first 2 seasons, most of the meeting related episodes have always been focused very much on the idea of async. This season we had earlier in the season, someone who was building Jacob was building a tool for synchronous video meetings to replace Zoom and Google Meet. So we're trying to cover also in this case, synchronous meetings and really focusing more on how and why. So for everyone that's listening, this is an episode about synchronous meetings. So I think, probably could be like the verbally one-line pitches. We're killing the crappy parts of synchronous meetings. There's so many of them. If you could just kill all the things and really keep the focus on what the real value of a synchronous meeting is and leave it to that. And again, the increase in productivity and the value are farther higher. But we've obviously seen in the last 12, 18 months that asynchronous has become a very hot topic within the remote space, within all the kind of conversations. Your thoughts, should all companies be async by default? Or should there be certain types of meetings that are always synchronous? Or again, when you need to have a synchronous meeting, that's, again, have certain criteria and things like that. Would love to hear your opinion.
Yeah. Well, I think in general, there is benefits to both async and synchronous communication. So I wouldn't say that any company should be either one or the other. So looking just at async communication, super beneficial for certain situations, especially if you work in different time zones. Then, it's really hard to connect synchronously if you're 12 hours or 9 hours apart. Berlin time and US West Coast time, super difficult to get that working together. If you need a longer thinking process to decide on something, async is ideal for those kind of situations. Or if it's more about updates, you don't need to sit together. You can do that through documents, through recording, and so on. But at the same time, if you look at synchronous communication, it's also extremely valuable, especially that part that you bring people together. And it's social interaction. And as humans, we do need that. And I strongly believe that if you bring people together, that you can create something wonderful, that it's more than just like 1 and 1. In the end, it's we get out of 1 and 1, you get 3. And you need that synchronous communication, in my opinion, for quick interactions, for brainstorming, so like more creative meetings, or complex problem solving, where you can feed off each other's thoughts and kind of you have this very dynamic process that you have in direct communication. So there is benefits for both types of communication, and that's why I wouldn't say that, and I don't believe that all companies should be async by default. What's more important is that you are very conscious. Every company should be conscious about how they communicate and when to choose what. So kind of avoiding this, the meeting could have been an email situations, right? And then it's important to find the right balance, the right mix between those two in order to get the best result of what you want to achieve. So think first about what you want to achieve, and then you think, what is the appropriate kind of communication to achieve that? Is that async, or is it sync, or is it a combination of both, where you do part of it sync and the rest async? So yeah, I would say no, I wouldn't implement it for everyone, but what should be implemented for everyone is this conscious decision making of how you communicate what you need in order to achieve your goal.
Okay, it's definitely interesting. I'm very much myself an advocate of the async by default, meaning it's not async only, it's by default, it's asynchronous, but when you need to have a synchronous meeting, which that will be like the next question of kind of what that criteria looks like, then of course have a synchronous meeting. I think you've hit one of those points perfectly. I think most meetings that I've sat in my career have been information sharing, right? It's one person or a group of people, they prepare a presentation ahead of time, they read word by word by word, and like you sit there thinking like, God, why couldn't they have just sent me this damn thing? I don't think there's, at least from my opinion, there's ever a situation where those should ever be synchronous. Those should be very much asynchronous. But the idea of kind of the collaboration ones or the brainstorming ones, we had an episode, was it this season or last season, with Joe Wadowski, who's the CEO of Maze, also kind of talking about this, and he had an interesting idea that he brought up from one of his mentors called the rock and the monkey idea, rock and the monkey problem. That in a rock problem, it's, hey, I have this big boulder in my middle of my garden. I know what the problem is, the rock. I know I need to solve it. I need to get it out of there. I know how to get it. I just need like 2 or 3 people to come lift it up and move it out. And okay, so those points, asynchronous, right? You don't, or it can come, I think those were like this asynchronous. Here, everyone put their points. Hey, you do this, step 1, step 2, step 3, solved. And then you had like the monkey problem, where it was much of, hey, I call you up, Robert. Hey, there's a monkey in my garden. I got to go to work now. Can you come over and take care of the monkey? And you don't know anything about monkeys. You don't know what I'm supposed to do with the monkey. And it's very much of, okay, you get people in the room together where you have an issue. So maybe it could be, revenue is down over the last quarter or the last month, or you've kind of seen a dip in something and you have no idea what it's from. Or hopefully, I'll put it the other way. You have a huge increase in traffic to the site and signups and things like that. And you're like, where did this come from? And you don't really see anything jump out. Again, you didn't do maybe any specific campaigns. So you get people together to try to brainstorm different ideas of, again, you have no idea what the problem is. So you certainly don't know what the solution is or how to get there. Then it's really kind of coming up with those points. And that kind of stuck with me, that idea where, again, if it's something you really clearly know, you don't need to kind of get the brains together. But if it's more of a kind of like that, everyone shares something because you have no idea what the issue is, a better case. But to kind of bring to the question of when synchronous meetings should happen. So I've been an advocate in teams that I've helped and I've coached when moving towards like an asynchronous by default method. It's having kind of like, I'm going to call it like a scorecard or a manual of, here's how and why and when you should have a synchronous meeting. Like, you need to check off these boxes to have a synchronous meeting. And I think the same thing as well as for the recipient. Like, here's your ways of not being in that meeting. If you can check off these boxes, you don't need to sit in that meeting. Any kind of best practices or thoughts that you have on when a synchronous meeting needs to happen, or is called, should there be some kind of structure or clear guidelines in place from both the meeting caller and the recipients themselves to be able to opt out? Should we have some guidelines, rules, or is it more each person who may be calling in that kind of ad hoc? Yes, I think we should have a synchronous meeting, so I'm going to invite all these people because I think they need to be there. Or, okay, hey, we should have much more of a structure in place before actually kind of calling that meeting.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love the comparison with the rock and the monkey. I think that's puts it in a very nice metaphor to grasp kind of what is needed. Love it. Regarding your question, I think having rules to opt out is kind of a patch for symptoms of kind of a bad meeting culture. It's if someone just sends out an invite, that's kind of, I think, the most common example. So there is no goal defined, no agenda, and so on. That means that just the meeting culture is not healthy. And if you implement those rules, okay, then you don't need to attend. If there was no agenda, then you don't need to attend. it's trying to fix that basically by nudging the organizer. Okay, I forgot to put that in place, so I should start with that. So my approach is that you should go one level higher and try to fix the meeting culture, implement a healthy meeting culture. Then you don't need those rules, the rule set basically, when you can and should opt out. And the things to look out for, as already mentioned, is okay, does it have a goal? Does it have an agenda, and so on? That is something that should be agreed upon with the team, so everyone is on the same page to agree. Okay, we want to implement that meeting culture. But then the solution is, how can you get that into life? And it's not just, putting it on a nice piece of paper and putting it in the meeting room, like in the office world, or having it in your Notion or your intranet, where it's just written down. The problem always exists. After also talking to many of our users and companies, that those guidelines do exist. The problem is in getting them into day-to-day life more than just 1 or 2 weeks after they've been implemented. Kind of in the day-to-day, just like it gets lost. That's actually also something that we try to help with verbally, by nudging you continuously to have a agenda. So if you invite verbally to the meeting, you don't have an agenda, it will nudge you, show you, okay, there is no agenda, here is how you can add it to your invite. And just by repetition, you can create those habits of a good meeting culture. So we have a whole feature set that we're rolling out, which we call habit nudging, where you can define as your team which meeting best practice do you want to have implemented. If a meeting is longer than 15 minutes, then it should have an agenda. If that doesn't take place, we send out a reminder to you that this meeting doesn't have an agenda, should put it in. So we take care of this implementation of that. And only once we generate the habits of having a goal, having an agenda, that the meeting is not too long, avoiding like too big meetings, all those best practices, then you can actually have valuable sync time and can avoid unnecessary meetings. So long answer to your question, but basically, I'm not a fan of having opt-out rules, but I'm very strongly proclaiming for implementing a good meeting culture. And we provide the tool tool set to help to do that, because once you have that, you don't need the rules to opt out anymore.
Okay, that makes sense. You hinted with the idea of the meeting agenda nudge as part of the next question. So for me, a proper good synchronous meeting is not just that called 30-minute block or whatever, the 60-minute block. There's a pre-meeting, there's a meeting during meeting, and there's a post-meeting meeting. For you, what does the optimal meeting whole structure look like? Pre, during, post, and how, and again, you hinted it for the pre-part with the agenda, but how does verbally actually help people run those proper meetings, again, covering or trying to cover as much of that three pieces as possible?
Yeah, I think also the clustering that you're using is exactly what we use internally when we look at the kind of the whole flows, like the pre, during, and post meeting processes. So yeah, I mean, pre-meeting, yeah, it's not just the 30 minutes that you are in a meeting, as you said, kind of everything begins with a proper preparation. That's the most important part of having a valuable meeting. It's not just sitting together. It's kind of the time you take before as an organizer to properly prepare that. It's by setting a goal, a purpose. What do you want to achieve? Only if you do that before, if you take the time to think about that, you can actually decide, do I need a meeting? How long does the meeting need to take place? And who do I need to have in the meeting? So you start with that. You go over to, what do I need to discuss, the agenda, basically, in order to achieve that goal? Also kind of time boxing it if it's a longer meeting in order to achieve that, and kind of in order to be able to stay on track. You need to decide who you actually need there, and there less is better instead of more is better in that case. Try to avoid having too many people and only invite who you really need to have there. And if you're not sure, then also at that point already, send an optional invitation, and the person can decide themselves, do they have to be there based on the agenda that is there. And then you can send the meeting minutes or a recording after that. And believe me, most of the people will take the gift of the additional time and will opt out to be in a meeting. So it's this whole process that you have before, and it takes you maybe 10 minutes to prepare that before. But that actually saves you multiples more of that during the meeting for everyone that's involved. So kind of it quickly adds up. I mean, then if you're in the meeting, maybe one last hint for the meeting time, because we're so strongly looking in kind of the whole meeting topic, trying to avoid standard times helps you already to save time. So get rid of 30-minute meetings, do 25 instead of 60 minutes, 50 minutes meeting. There's this so-called Parkinson's law, which basically says that time takes as much space as you allocate to it, which basically means if you set a meeting for 30 minutes, you will use the 30 minutes. And that's why probably hardly ever you have a meeting that significantly ends earlier. You always take the time that you have scheduled. But that additional 5 minutes helps you then to kind of calm down before the next meeting, get a coffee, toilet break, and most importantly, context switch. So that actually helps for kind of your psychological balance, that instead of having this back-to-back meeting. So it's just
hopefully you can avoid that completely.
Exactly. But kind of starting with those small things already help you kind of to have better meeting. If you go in during the meeting part, it's taking conscious time at the beginning for check-in, because you will never start a meeting diving into the content, but you need time for some social interaction. As mentioned, kind of it's a good sync meeting is about interacting with people, and that's
an interesting point. Again, my very much of opinionated opinions are, work meetings are work meetings, and really like the sync time should be for team building. So you have a block of time, and that's what I've done with my teams. Like the work portion or the information sharing was always async, and the time we had synchronous time was always team building, relationship building. Yeah. So I'm very much not a fan of starting like a work meeting with like the first couple minutes of how is everything going, because it's always felt like to me it's okay, a box I have to check off, and the person who's running the meeting, they honestly don't care. They were just expecting you to say, "Hey, Robert, how was your weekend?" or "How you feeling?" They're just kind of mentally expecting you saying, "Oh yeah, okay, everything's fine. Okay, thanks. Now let's get down to it." So I think at least for me, like relationship building, there's a 30-minute time, a 60-minute time. Hey, when you're playing games together, you're building relationships together. And now if you're getting people together for work, again, kind of to your point, get away from the 30 minutes. Hey, the faster we can dive into this, the faster hopefully we can be out of this thing and then kind of moving back to the time. Barry, I cut you off, so please continue.
No, and interesting perspective. I mean, I do agree that kind of you need to as well have like separate time for team building. That this should not be kind of the 3 minutes you put in for check-in should be your team building. I mean, I think that's not really sustainable.
Unfortunately, for most cases, and for many managers, that's where the relationship building is, especially remotely.
Exactly. That's I think being stuck in the old ways, kind of not adapting to the new situations. Okay, that should be enough, which it's obviously not. But for me, kind of the check-in time is the equivalent of in the old world, in the office world, that's the time you need to sit down in your chair, pour your water, kind of, and land in the meeting. And as well, the context switch again. Having that time set aside actually makes the rest of the meeting way more productive. So consciously thinking about that. But then, starting to review the agenda, getting everyone on the same page, what needs to be discussed. So you can also adjust that if someone wants or needs to change the agenda. So you can consciously, again, take the decision instead of running through the meeting. I have this topic I want to discuss, and then you completely drift off. So it's just kind of, best practices that help you. Stay on time, stick to the agenda, then avoid one person just hijacking the meeting. So try to keep a balanced speaker share within the meeting. So those are all things that help you during the meeting to run a productive, efficient meeting. And afterwards, the whole post-meeting part, it's reflecting on what happened in the meeting. So as with every process, you have to review the process. You have to review the meeting. We spend so much time in meetings, but that's the only process that's not structurally improved. Any other process we have at work is there's so many iterations. How can we make that a tiny bit faster, a tiny bit better? So for me, the crucial part is this in the post meeting section. Review your meetings regularly. What can be improved? Who spoke how much? Does everyone need to be there? Did we run overtime? Do we need to shorten time, put less agenda points on? Do we need to have it weekly? Is bi-weekly enough, or monthly, or do we need a meeting at all? So it's a continuous process. And kind of coming to that point, how do we try to help with that? So in the kind of the whole journey, it's about we make it easy to show an agenda by just implementing it in the meeting invite. If you start the meeting, we show a short GIF that makes you smile to set kind of the right mood, because it's social interactions. And if you're set in the right mood, it also, again, it helps you to have healthier, more productive discussions. We help you to easily display that and time box the agenda, so you keep focused during the meeting and avoid kind of getting off track. We have a speaker timer, as mentioned. So if someone speaks more than 2 minutes, we show a timer that shows how long the person's been talking. In the end, to avoid unwanted long monologues. Mostly people don't hijack a meeting consciously. Some do, unfortunately, but mostly it's unconscious. And we have those mechanisms of soft nudges that help you to basically keep check of that. And then before the end of the meeting, in Google Meet, for example, we send a chat message like 5 minutes before, okay, time to wrap it up. So you actually have time to align on the next steps and not have spent 30 minutes and then it's like, okay, no one knows who does what when. So that's what we're helping with. And kind of for the post-meeting part, we're working on this feature set now for the meeting analytics, that afterwards you can actually see who spoke how much, how long did you actually need for the meeting. That helps you to review that process and structurally improve that.
Yeah, that's what really has me excited about Verbally. Again, normally not a fan of synchronous meetings, but as we started off, the pitch line of killing the crappy parts of synchronous meetings, of, again, a tool covering all three of those parts, where beforehand, and I'll kind of ask like a follow-up question to this, are you a believer in the practice of sharing the agenda ahead of time? Now, this is something that I have done for a long time, and a tactic that I've used probably to prevent, I'll call it, probably 70% of those meetings where you're trying to get someone to kind of get an approval or something, having somebody involved, where, again, there's, as you said, a very detailed agenda. What are the expectations and what are the takeaways you're hoping to get from the meetings, and who is assigned to each one of those? So I very much have seen hey, I'm waiting for Robert to approve this project. And I mention Robert, hey, you're being invited for this, to just give the green light. And then all of a sudden you see like a 60-minute block or a 30-minute block in your time, like, oh God, but you see, hey, Robert, we just need your approval. No, 70% of those cases, at least I've had in my career, Robert just replied back, approved. And then this way, I'm out of that meeting. But also gives the opportunity for kind of collaboration ahead of time, where you can ask questions, you can give feedback, so maybe even adding more value. And then, what it Verbally does during the meeting, which I love, again, getting people on, kind of will bring me to my next question. Keeping people on task, get things. I would actually love like the cutoff. Hey, you got 2 minutes, and we just shut your mic. Like maybe you need to kind of raise your head, for an extra 30 seconds or something. But like, all right, you're done. Moving on. And then the third part of the post meeting, which is something again that excites me about the product, is that analytics of, again, keeping on task, but more in the sense of, hey, FYI, Scott, we see that Robert, who's been part of the last couple of meetings, only is engaged like 3% of the time. Probably he doesn't need to be there, for future meetings, and being able to kind of give that insight. Because when you had said earlier about the idea of kind of structure of putting people as optional versus maybe required, and maybe giving them that sense that if Robert is not so engaged, and again, because in theory he doesn't really need to be engaged, he's not so involved there, giving you that heads up to say, hey, maybe it's this first step, put him as optional, or just maybe not include him again because there's a lack of the engagement. So I think that's quite exciting. But just wanted to get your thoughts on the idea of, again, sharing like that detailed agenda like ahead of time, a couple of days ahead of time, and maybe part. Again, that was something that came up with the episode with Jacob from Butter, of all the asynchronous work that's actually involved in synchronous meetings. Would kind of love your thoughts there.
Yeah, totally agree with your approach to share the agenda ahead of time. As mentioned, that if you want to have people or participants being prepared for the meeting, so you can have actually productive discussion. If it's just about you talking, then you don't have to have a meeting. You can send an email, you can record a Loom, and so on. So if you actually want a good interaction, you want people to be prepared. And for that, they need to understand what needs to be discussed. And as you say, you can even avoid either the whole meeting or a certain part of the meeting asynchronously, potentially. But for that, you need to write down properly in the agenda what you want to achieve. So yeah, I think that's one of the main points about a successful meeting, is that you think about and share that agenda up front, so the participants can prepare, can decide whether they actually need to be there or that part can be skipped. Yeah, so I think if you keep the agenda for yourself, that creates a whole different bucket of problems, and that actually balloons basically the whole meeting problem and the amount of time we spend in meetings.
I agree. So coming to one of the points that you had mentioned before about maybe someone taking over the meeting, thinking about introverts, right? Introverts can quite easily get lost or silenced in synchronous meetings, especially remotely, when they don't have physical presence in a room, where they're just kind of right here, a face in the box, in a format like anything like Zoom or any other tool. And again, they can get overridden or kind of pushed to the side by passionate people or people like me who are opinionated extroverts. How can meeting hosts in general better moderate meetings to ensure that everyone has a voice in the meeting? And certainly linked to that, and obviously verbally, how can tools using AI like Verbally help ensure that introverts and everyone has an equal voice within that meeting?
Yeah. I mean, I think very important point that you mentioned, kind of that there is different personalities, and in the end, kind of that's why it's also difficult to run good meetings in the end, because we work with different personalities and they behave differently. So we need to kind of address every personality differently in order to make them contribute. So in the end, the role then of the moderator is to make sure everyone's voice is heard, or everyone has the room to make themselves heard if they want to say something. And as having those different personalities, it's not even intentionally done that the extrovert wants to take over all the speaking time. Sometimes, yes, but mostly it's not intentionally to cut someone off, but just a personality trait that they kind of have strong opinions, want to share them. So the role of a moderator is kind of to try to balance that out. The problem is, what we've seen is, if you have a human moderator, it's not scalable. You can't have a moderator in every meeting. That's very difficult to have, especially for bigger organizations, unless, of course, the organizer takes over that role. But it's then again, as it being social interactions, the intervention, for example, of a moderator, if it repeats itself too often, can then again be seen as a kind of unfair critique, and can then demotivate the person in the future to contribute, for example, the extrovert. So our approach that is kind of that Verbally is a neutral observer, neutral moderator. It's a tool that tells you during the meeting if someone has been talking too much. And it will continue reminding you that you spoke over 2 minutes, even if it's the 5th time. Whereas the organizer maybe does that 1, 2, maximum 3 times. After that, it just feels rude and doesn't want to do that. Or another extreme example is if the person that's talking too much is your manager. Some people don't have the courage to interrupt then their manager that they're talking too much. And so Verbally comes in as this neutral observer no matter who it is, it just states the fact that someone has been talking for 2 minutes, not saying it's good or bad. And that actually helps through that repetitive process to change our behavior. And that's how we help kind of during the meeting. And the other part is the whole post-meeting part, to make it transparent who spoke how much, so that it's also not, in my opinion, you've been talking most of the meeting and didn't give anyone time. It's the tool is helping you to support that message. So here, you've been talking 80% of the time. We need to balance that out a bit more in order to have discussion. Or the other way around, like, okay, if that meeting is about me speaking 80% of the time, or you, Scott, you attended the meeting, then maybe let's use a different format. You can record a Loom where you can, if it's an update, you can give your update through that. So we help during the meeting to keep this balanced speaker share, and post-meeting by making transparent what actually happened in the meeting without giving this judgmental touch that can be seen as critique, which negatively impacts then future behavior. So I think that's a big advantage of using a software instead of a human for that.
No, that's actually very interesting. Like, as you're speaking, like, ideas are kind of crossing my head, especially with the post. I think that the question of more just understanding, because I think that's probably the part that excites me the most, of really learning more about how it works now and like what the vision is. And it makes sense kind of, hey, again, the use case that we had before was Robert is engaged 3% of the time. And it's interesting, again, love to hear what you're thinking of. And again, how do all the pieces come together? Is it, with the agenda, Robert wasn't having a specific meeting agenda item. So, hey, that 3% means, hey, Robert should be optional or not invited. Or maybe on the other side, that Robert has maybe one or two items there. And in fact, it only spoke 3% means that he's not speaking as much as he should. So again, then thinking like, what is there a better format? I mean, I think that's super interesting. Again, maybe if Robert is supposed to be there, he's supposed to be more engaged, and he simply isn't. Yes, maybe to use a different format, maybe to do like a one-on-one. Like, is the AI thinking about like different alternatives? Not only just, hey, Robert is speaking the 3%, and then again, maybe currently or in the future, it's going to understand maybe from the agenda items, okay, this is a good thing or this is a bad thing, and then kind of what looks like afterwards. And in the cases where you said like maybe this meeting shouldn't exist, like would love to hear like what you're thinking about that. How can really an AI really understand that, maybe outside of engagement or a simple poll, right? An anonymous poll at the end of the time, like, should you have had this meeting? Thumbs up or thumbs down? And if you get 50+% more thumbs down, then maybe it says, hey, after a few meetings, let's get rid of this thing. Yeah, I'm fascinated. Maybe talk to us a little bit more about that post, and maybe even the vision, like what you can do today, and maybe where that vision is going.
Yeah. So in terms of where we're heading, I think you mentioned some good examples, kind of how detailed can the suggestions be. So we're starting more general, first surfacing the data, then going into more general advice based on the data, and then going more deeper into, as you said, based on the agenda points. If you were tagged for a certain agenda point and you didn't speak at all, what can that mean? So we need to generate more context in order to be able to judge whether that's good or bad, or potentially good or bad. So we always think about kind of being non-judgmental, because the meetings with being social interactions, can be so diverse, and it's complex to say for sure whether something was good or bad. So it's more about surfacing the data and suggesting what could be a better solution. And going in the future then, for example, that you can assign roles of the participants in the meeting. Is it just a observer that should be there for urgent problem solving or technical question resolving in that situation, in that meeting? And then it would be fine if that person has little to no engagement, because the role is specified for that. So we will go more detailed into understanding kind of the roles of the participants in the agenda points and so on, to give you a bit more customized recommendations based on a meeting type. Is it a brainstorming session where everyone should give their input, or is it a more a discussion between two functions where you have two experts on each side, and it's fine if one is not speaking because that topic was not raised, but it was necessary in that situation to have everyone in the room, virtual room, to get quickly to a decision.
Interesting. So again, the ideas are always churning in my head. That's the curse of the entrepreneur. Again, thinking about the case, just how fascinating this is to me. Of again, let's say I had a meeting about this podcast. So we had a 25-minute meeting. We have 3 agenda points: podcast, blog post, social media campaign. Right, and you, Robert, you're the social media person. Where based on AI, maybe and then using NLP talks about podcast, and we kind of language changes to blog, where maybe it understands, hey, you're the social media person, you're linked to agenda item number 3, or maybe in essence, when you kind of join the meeting, you go into like a waiting room. We call it like a waiting room, where since the first 2 points have nothing to do with you, you don't really get pulled into the meeting, so you can still do whatever you're doing, and then only once you kind of get to that third final point where you're actually need to be involved, does it pull you in. And again, maybe giving it that, because people complain about, if I'm agenda point number 3, and out of 25 minutes, we only get to that point at 22 meeting, minute 22, I've just sat there for 22 minutes for nothing. Yeah. And having that idea of, okay, well, I just need to be here for there's 3 minutes. So just pull me in, right, for those 3 meetings. And usually that's always what you hear from like a CEO, right? When there's a big meeting going on, like pull me in or call me when you need me specifically. And kind of the other way, conversely, hey, I'm the podcast engineer. Like as soon as I'm done with the podcast piece, like I'm gone, and okay, I could maybe, if I need to get like a recording, or if you need me, you can say my name, and all of a sudden it'll like ping me or like bring me back onto the video. I don't know, this is very fascinating, because like in essence, like that's I think the biggest issue of synchronous meetings, where like you're sitting there not engaged, waiting for some point where you're involved, either like at the beginning or the end, or once you've gotten involved and you're kind of now sitting there waiting for the meeting to end. Like how do we potentially solve that? How do we kind of like have like this essence, like a waiting room, right? You're just kind of sitting there doing your work, whatever it is, and only at the right time does it actually like hook you into the meeting to provide the value that you need and engagement that you need. And then if it's over, okay, let you slide back out to the waiting room or what have you. This is fascinating.
Exactly as I say, kind of there is like endless possibilities to think about that, and that's kind of why that space is so exciting, because there is so much to be done. And as I said, so also just thinking about the examples you gave, you can send a Slack notification once the agenda point comes up, or 5 minutes before. You can start with just static times, then in the future, based on content, if you get to that point, you can generate a separate meeting invite for the person for that time block based on tagging a person. So there's so many possibilities to actually improve that. I mean, what we've tried out in the user interview, where we're simulating different features, was that you can, through voice command, extend the meeting time if you need to, verbally add 5 minutes. In that case, it would change the calendar entrance as well by 5 minutes, and you could notify automatically if you have another meeting coming up, could notify automatically via Slack or email that person is coming a bit later because of that meeting being extended. Instead of having this, now I'm in between 2 meetings, totally stressed out. Here I can't finish properly on time. There I need to jump into the next one. So there's like those endless possibilities of improving where we need to spend time for the synchronous exchange, and where we can avoid that and do asynchronous work.
That's super exciting. Last question I have for you, and again, I think we've probably hit on all the points maybe a couple times, and maybe we'll kind of try to wrap it up into one nice package as we close it out. But managers who are still stuck in some old office traditions tend to also be very much big fans of synchronous meetings and having too many of them. While the rest of the team, it's kind of quite clear, are much more interested in async. What's the best advice that you can give these leaders into moving away from tradition, right? Because we're all moving away from the office tradition into the future of work. And what advice can you give them to start helping them organize better meetings and the right meetings?
Yeah. I think kind of as you framed it, they're stuck in old traditions, and that basically means you need to start a change process, and that's what's difficult, right? You need to do something differently and continuously do that. So not just try something out. So my advice would be, first, kind of take a step back to reflect and create awareness of what's been going on. So have a look at your calendar and see how much time you actually spend in meetings and how much you could potentially free up. So if you see that visually, I mean, if you look at the calendar, if from someone like being stuck in the old way, it's terrifying. Like I kind of, my heart starts racing just looking at a calendar like that. So if you create first that awareness, then okay, how can we solve that? And then start small, start getting small wins. So take one meeting series, look at it and see, do you actually need to still have that meeting, or can that be asynchronous? If that needs to be a meeting, then start implementing those meeting best practices by setting a goal, setting an agenda, trying to shorten the time, getting away from the standard times, and roll with it. See how that feels if you get into the rhythm. And I can assure that person that once you try it out, you feel, okay, that's actually a much better meeting if I took the time before. And that's so fascinating when we talk to our users and get user feedback. It's like, oh yeah, like once I start using verbally, once I get used to it, kind of like it feels weird to have a meeting without it. If I don't have the time or visual anymore, if I don't have the agenda to follow. So it's about creating the small wins. And then it's like, okay, now I can take care of the next meeting. And in the end, it's about, again, this, as mentioned before, this continuous process of improving, reflecting. And so you work your way through, and that's kind of how you can start getting away from the old, being stuck in the old process, and getting better synchronous meetings and getting rid of some meetings that can totally be done asynchronously. As mentioned, like all those update meetings where just one person is talking. Why do you need to sit in a meeting at a specific time? You can record that. The person can then watch it in twice the speed, which again saves up half the time, or just jump into the part of the that recording that is important. So I think creating awareness, taking first steps, create small wins, and basically go from there. And using a tool like Verbally actually helps to implement that, because you have this repetition, those reminders, and it's an easy way to implement those best practices, and instead of trying to find your own ways to implement that.
That's fantastic. For people who are listening, who are interested in learning more about you, getting hold of you, learning more about Verbally, trying out Verbally, what's the best way to get a hold of you and to check out Verbally?
You can check out Verbally on verbally.io. Product as well for free currently, so you can just sign up, invite the assistant to your meeting as a participant, and that's it. So it's super easy to use. And if you want to reach out, best you can reach me on LinkedIn. That's the best way to reach me. Otherwise as well on Twitter. So happy for any questions around that topic. Always happy to chat.
Amazing. Robert, thank you so much for joining. It was a great conversation. Again, I always enjoy, I guess I'm enjoying more of these conversations around the topic of synchronous, which again, we're always very, very much avoided when, again, the focus is very much of, yes, let's kill the crappy parts of meetings. And what are the right parts of meetings, and how do we take advantage of the good, useful parts of synchronous meetings? How do we only focus on that? How do we, again, wipe away all the stuff? So love the insights, love the feedback. Appreciate you joining today. And for everyone listening, until the next episode, Have a lovely day, everybody.
Thank you very much for having me, Scott.
Our pleasure.
Great talking to you.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's show. I really hope you enjoyed it. My aim is for everyone listening to have one takeaway from each episode they can then go and use with their teams. If you enjoyed the show, please feel free to support me by subscribing in your favorite podcasting app, on our YouTube channel, share it with friends and colleagues, and please feel free to buy me a coffee via the show's website.